good evening. Or good night, more likely, for if you have found your way here, you have almost certainly come the way that nearly everyone comes to this quiet place, at the soft worn end of a long day, with the lamps turned low and the house gone still around you, and the whole wide world loosening, at last, towards sleep. Wherever you are tonight, however you are lying just now, you can begin, very gently, to let go. There is nothing left that the day requires of you, nothing to finish, nothing to answer, nothing that cannot wait, patient and untroubled, until the morning comes. You have come to the 1 hour that belongs entirely to rest, and you are allowed to sink all the way down into it, slowly, softly, without the least hurry anywhere in the world. So take a slow breath in if you like, and let it out even more slowly than it came, and feel, as you do, the whole weight of your body settling down at last into whatever holds it. The mattress soft beneath you, the pillow cool under your head, the covers drawn up warm over your shoulders. Let those shoulders come down now, down from wherever the long day has carried them. Let the small muscles around your eyes grow loose and still. Let your jaw soften, and your hands lie open and easy, and your breath find its own slow depth without your minding it at all. There is nothing more for you to carry now, and nothing more for you to hold. The day is done, and the only thing left to do is to be still, and to breathe, and to listen, and to let a quiet voice carry you somewhere very far away and very long ago, while you drift down, by soft warm degrees, towards sleep. For that is all this is, truly, a gentle voice, and a long slow story, and a warm dark place for your mind to wander in, until it grows too heavy and too content to wander any further. You do not need to remember a word of it. You do not need to hold the thread from one end of the night to the other, or follow where it leads, or keep any of it at all. If sleep should come and gather you up long before the story is done, you will have done the one right and perfect thing, and the story will still be here, patient and unhurried, waiting for you whenever you should care to return. There is no test at the end of it. There is nothing you must keep. There is only rest, and the slow unspooling of a tale, meant for no other purpose in all the world than to ease you softly down into sleep. And if your thoughts are still turning, if some corner of the day is still going quietly round and round somewhere at the back of your mind, replaying what was said, reaching ahead toward the small cares of tomorrow, then that is all right too, and you need not fight it. You do not have to push those thoughts away, or scold them, or hurry them out of the room. You can simply let them be, the way you might let a little wind outside the window simply be, there, but no longer asking anything of you, no longer needing your reply. Let them drift toward the edges of things. Let them settle and grow quiet on their own, the way a house grows quiet when everyone in it has finally found their place. There is nowhere you must be tonight, and nothing you must solve, and so, little by little, your mind can loosen its hold on the day, and let the whole of it float gently away. Tonight we are going to travel, not across any sea that you could sail, and not to any country that you could reach by any road, but backward, softly, down the long slow river of time, further back than almost any story ever dares to go. We are going back not 10,000 years, as we have gone before, but twice that and more, 20,000 years, and further still, to the very deep of the last great winter of the world, the long age of ice, when the cold lay upon half the earth like a second sky, and the glaciers stood in the north as high as mountains, and the year was mostly winter, and the summers were brief and bright and precious as candle flames. It is the oldest of all the human homes we will ever visit together, and the coldest and. This is the wonder I want to carry you gently into tonight, very far from the saddest. For our kind lived there. not merely endured it, not merely clung on shivering at the edge of the dark, but lived, with fire and family and warm sewn furs and full bellies and songs and pictures painted by lamplight deep in the singing dark of the earth. We are going to spend this whole long night in the age of ice, and I promise you, before we are done, you will not want to leave it. For we have been taught, most of us, to picture that age as a kind of horror, a white waste, a starving twilight, a bitter fight against a world that wanted us dead. And it is true that it was cold beyond anything you have ever felt, and hard in ways we have, mostly, blessedly, forgotten how to imagine. But let that picture soften now, because it was never the whole truth, and it is not the truth we will keep tonight. The world of the ice was not a dead world. It was one of the most alive that this earth has ever worn, a vast, luminous, wind-combed grassland teeming with more great beasts than any place now living, under skies of an enormous clean cold clarity, lit at night by curtains of green and rose fire that hung and rippled from the top of the sky. And the people who moved across it were not poor frightened creatures. They were the most skilled human beings who had ever lived, knowing the whole living world the way you know the rooms of your own house in the dark, warm inside their furs. Gathered close around their fires, holding one another through the long nights exactly as you are held tonight. Their whole art, their whole genius, the thing our kind learnt in the cold and has never once forgotten, was the making of warmth. And warmth is what this story is made of, from end to end. So here is the journey we shall make, and we shall make it the way such journeys deserve to be made, slowly and warmly, and with no appointments to keep along the way. We shall stand first on the great cold plain itself, the mammoth steppe, and feel how wide it was, and how full of light. We shall watch the enormous herds move across it, the mammoth and the bison, the reindeer and the wild horse, like slow rivers of warm life under the pale sun. We shall kneel at the first hearths and learn the oldest and dearest of all our arts, the keeping of fire. We shall build the shelters, the tents of hide bent over on their poles, and the great domed houses raised of mammoth-bone on the far eastern steppe. We shall sit by lamplight while patient hands draw a bone needle through softened skin and make the warm sewn clothing that was the truest magic of the age. We shall gather and cook and share the food of the cold and feel a family fed. We shall go down, holding a little flame, into the painted caves and stand before the horses and the lions and the great bulls glowing on the stone. We shall keep the long winter nights by the fire, among the stories and the flutes and the small carved animals. And at the last we shall follow the people out across the whole wide world, and feel the ice let go and the green come back, and the long winter of the earth soften at last into the gentle world that became our own. Some of what I tell you tonight is known, dug patiently out of the frozen ground and the cave floors by careful hands. Read from the ash of old hearths and the bones by the fire, and the paint still clinging to the deep stone walls. From the bone needles no longer than your finger, and the little ivory beasts worn smooth by loving thumbs. And some of it we can only picture, softly and honestly, filling in the warmth and the voices and the smell of the cooking meat around the bare and beautiful bones of what the earth remembers, and where we are only imagining. I will tell you so, gently as we go, the way I always do. But none of it, remember, is for you to hold on to. It is only a soft path for your mind to follow down into the dark, and you may let go of it whenever you please, and sleep whenever you please. Let us begin then out on the great plain, in the enormous cold clean light of a world that has been gone for 20,000 years. And let us begin, as everything in that world began, with warmth, with you, wrapped and safe and drowsy. Looking out across the ice, picture first the land itself and take your time with it, for there is a great deal of it, and no reason at all to hurry across. Imagine a plain so wide that the mind cannot easily hold its edges, a vast, open, rolling grassland running on and on beneath an enormous sky. From the warm seas of the south to the walls of ice in the north, and from the setting of the sun to its rising, further than any people of that age ever walked in all their lives. There were no forests here. In the deep of the cold, only grass, endless pale gold grass, cured dry and sweet by the wind, rippling in long slow waves to the very rim of the world, and low soft hills, and shining threads of half-frozen river, and here and there a scatter of dark rock, or a stand of dwarf willow no higher than your knee bowing in the wind along a stream. The far people who came after, who loved to give names to things that are gone, would call this the mammoth steppe, the grassland of the great beasts, and it was the largest single living country the earth has ever worn, one unbroken sweep of grass wrapping the whole cold top of the world. Stand out upon it in your mind for a moment, small and warm and unafraid, and feel how far it goes. There is room here. There has never been so much room. And away to the north, at the far edge of everything, stood the ice. Not the thin ice of a winter pond, but ice as a country of its own, great sheets and domes of it, piled up over long ages higher than any hill, higher than mountains. A slow white world that lay upon the northern lands, and did not melt from one lifetime to the next, nor from one grandmother's grandmother to the next. It was blue in its deep cracks and white on its long slopes, and rose gold on its heights, when the low sun touched it, and it moved, though far too slowly for any eye to see, grinding south over the ages with a patience beyond all patience, carrying stones, smoothing valleys, breathing out across the plain a cold, clean, endless air. You need not fear it, drowsy as you are. To the people of the steppe it was simply the edge of the known, the white shoulder of the world, always there in the north, the way the sea is always there for those who live beside it, immense and old, and mostly ignored. A thing you lived near and did not trouble, going about the warm, small business of your days beneath it. The ice kept the plain cold, and the cold kept the grass, and the grass fed the herds, and the herds fed the people, and so, in its slow way, even the great ice was a kind of distant, frozen kindness, holding the whole living world in its place. Feel, too, the strange, dry brightness of that world, for it was nothing like the grey, wet cold you may be imagining. The air of the mammoth steppe was clean and thin and astonishingly clear, swept endlessly by wind, so dry that the snow came seldom and lay light and powdery when it came. And the sky on a fair day was a hard, deep, flawless blue you could almost drink. The sun rode low, even at midday, and its light came in long and golden and level, laying the shadow of every grass blade and every grazing beast out sideways across the land, so that the whole plain in the late of an afternoon seemed made of gold and long blue shadow, glowing, immense, and utterly still. In such light a herd of mammoth a mile off stood out clear as your own hand. In such light the breath of the animals rose in slow white plumes and hung. In such light the grass was not merely gold, but 1,000 shades of it, straw and amber and honey and pale bleached silver, where the wind had combed it flat. It was a hard land, yes, but it was a beautiful one, clean and vast and full of light, and the people who were born to it thought it. Quite simply, the whole and only world, and loved it the way you love the country of your childhood, without ever once thinking to. And then there was the night, and oh, the nights of the mammoth steppe, on which I could keep you gently until morning. When the low sun finally went down behind the rim of the grass and the gold drained slowly out of the world, the cold came down clean and quiet. And the sky did a thing that no city sky you have ever seen can do. The stars came out, not the few faint stars of a lamplit town, but the true stars, the whole enormous unblunted host of them, thick as spilled salt from horizon to horizon, so many and so bright that they cast the faintest silver shadow, and the pale river of them arched clear across the middle of the sky like a road. And some nights, over the northern ice, the sky itself would begin, very softly, to burn great slow curtains of green light, and rose, and a deep dim violet, rising and rippling and folding along the top of the world, silent as a held breath, brightening and fading and stealing back again for hours. The people watched it surely from the mouths of their shelters, wrapped warm, their faces lit faintly green, and what they made of it we cannot truly know, and I will not pretend to you that we can. A fire in the sky, a road of spirits, the light of far-off hearths that were not ours, only that they saw it, this same slow silent flame above the snow, and that it is one of the loveliest things human eyes have ever been given to see. Let it hang there in your mind now, unhurried, over the dark and shining plain, the green light and the salt of stars and the whole cold sky at peace. Now the cold, I will not pretend away, for it was real and it was deep, a cold that in the heart of winter could still the breath and silver the eyelashes and freeze a river solid to walk upon. But feel how the people met it, because that meeting is the whole story of their courage, and there is nothing frightening in it at all. They did not fight the cold as we might, with fury and complaint. They dressed for it, and sheltered from it, and warmed themselves against it, and by long skill they simply lived inside it, the way a seed lives inside its hard shell through the winter, waiting. A person of the steppe, going out across the plain on a bright bitter morning, went wrapped from crown to heel in warm sewn fur, a hood drawn close about the face, mittens on the hands, boots stuffed soft with dry grass, and inside all that, warm, genuinely, deeply warm, warmer perhaps than you might think, the body's own small fire kept close and unlost. The cold was the weather of their whole world, as ordinary to them as grey rain is to us, and they knew it as you know your own weather, which wind carried snow, which stillness carried the deepest freeze how to read the sky, when to travel, and when to lie snug and wait. Cold was not their enemy. Cold was simply the air of home, and warmth pressed close against that vast clean cold, was the sweetest and most reliable pleasure they had, as it is when you think of it, the sweetest and most reliable pleasure you are feeling this very moment, lying warm in your bed while the night stands cold and enormous outside your window. For here is the thing about that world that I most want you to carry down into sleep. It was full. We call it a wasteland out of ignorance, picturing white emptiness, but the mammoth steppe was one of the most crowded stages of life this earth has ever set. The rich dry grass fed uncountable multitudes of great grazing beasts, more kinds and greater numbers of large animals together than survive anywhere in the whole world now, and where the grazers were, the whole living web was, the wolf and the fox trotting the margins, the birds of the brief summer marshes rising in clouds, the small burrowing things under the turf, the fish in the cold rivers, the berries reddening in their short season, the fat roots swelling underground. It was a plain that could feed a people well, if the people were skilled enough to gather what it offered, and they were more than skilled enough. They did not scrape a bare and desperate living from a dying land. They lived off the abundance of a rich one, moving with its seasons, taking what it gave, wanting for little in the good years. And the good years were many. So let go now of the last of that old sad picture, the shivering, the starving, the bleak white nothing. Fill the plain instead with what was truly there, gold grass to the world's edge, clean cold air, the burning northern lights, the salt of stars, and life, life, life in enormous slow-moving herds under a low golden sun. And it is those herds we must go to next, for they were the beating heart of the whole cold world, the great warm rivers of life, whose wandering set the rhythm of every human year. Let your breath go long and slow now, as slow as the great beasts moving, and let us drift a little way out across the grass to meet them, the mammoth and the bison, the reindeer and the wild horse, the herds that fed, and clothed, and warmed, and in 100 ways sustained the people of the ice, and that fill the oldest and dearest of all our pictures. There is nothing you need do. There is nowhere you need be. Only lie still, and breathe, and let the plain roll out before you, gold to the edge of sleep, while the herds come slowly into view. They came across the grass like slow weather. If you had stood on one of the low hills of the mammoth steppe on a clear cold morning and looked out, you might have seen them from very far away, a darkness on the gold, a shifting shadow spread wide across the plain, resolving as it came nearer into shapes, and then into backs and heads and moving legs, and then into the great living multitude of a herd on the move, hundreds of animals. Thousands, flowing over the land in a broad unhurried tide, grazing as they went, calves close against their mothers' flanks, the whole mass drifting always in the one slow direction that the season and the grass and some old deep knowledge in them had chosen. And you would have heard them before you were near, the low steady murmur of a great herd. The tearing of grass multiplied 10,000 times into a soft ceaseless rustle, the calls back and forth, the drum of hooves through the ground felt in the soles of your feet before it ever reached your ears. This was the true wealth of the ice, not gold, not stone, but these great warm rivers of life, crossing and recrossing the plain with the turning year. And the whole life of the people was tuned, like a held note, to their coming and their going. Greatest of all, and dearest to the memory of that whole lost age, were the mammoths, the woolly mammoths, the huge slow-tusked ones, the very lords of the steppe. Picture one gently, a great domed head and high-humped shoulders, a coat of long red-brown hair hanging almost to the ground and swaying as it walked, small patient eyes, and the long curved ivory tusks sweeping out and up and inward. Worn smooth and pale, used to sweep the snow from the grass in winter. They were not fearsome to look upon, for all their size they were grave, and slow, and oddly gentle in their bearing, moving in small close family bands led by the oldest and wisest of the mothers, the little ones tucked in among the legs of the grown. The whole group leaning always toward one another with the deep tenderness that the largest animals so often keep. The people held them, we may be sure, in a special awe, for a single mammoth was a mountain of gift, meat past counting, fat to burn and eat, a hide vast as a tent, bones like the timbers of a house, and the long ivory that carved into beads and spear points, and the little beasts we will meet by the fire. To come upon the great ones on the plain was to stand in the presence of the largest warm-blooded life the people knew, and near them, on the same wide grass, moved the woolly rhinoceros, huge and long-horned and solitary, shouldering through the snow. And the story of the whole age is written first in these two great shaggy shapes, moving slow and enormous across the gold. But it was the reindeer, most likely, that the people loved with the steadiest and most practical love, the reindeer that came in their vast migrating multitudes twice in every year, flooding north in the spring toward the calving grounds, and pouring south again in the autumn before the deepest cold. The same broad rivers of antlered life, following the same old roads across the plain. Year upon year upon year, as faithful in their season as the sun. A people who knew where the reindeer would cross, and when need never go hungry, and so the reindeer set the calendar of the human year, and the camps were pitched to meet them, and the whole slow dance of the people's wandering was in truth a following, a keeping of company, across the seasons, with the great herds that carried the people's living on their backs. And from the reindeer came nearly everything a life required: warm hide for clothing and for the covering of tents, sinew for thread and bowstring and binding, antler for tools and toggles and the eyed needles that sewed the winter clothes, bone for 100 uses, and food to dry and store against the dark. Nothing of the animal was wasted, ever, not from meanness, but from a kind of reverence, a deep old understanding that what the plain gave was a gift and must be honoured by being wholly used. And beside the reindeer ran the wild horses in their stocky dun-coloured bands, manes stiff and upright, tails streaming, and the great herds of bison, dark and heavy and bearded, breathing their fog into the cold, and the wild cattle, the aurochs tall and long-horned, and the pale swift saiga with their strange soft down-turned noses, and the musk-oxen standing in their close shaggy rings against the wind. The plain carried them all at once, in numbers we can now scarcely imagine, and the people moved among them like one more knowing creature of the grass. Now the getting of this bounty, the hunt, which was the great skilled labour of the men and often of the women too, I will speak of softly, for it was not the wild bloody chaos we sometimes picture, and there is nothing in it tonight to trouble your rest. It was, above all, a work of knowing. The hunters of the ice were not desperate, they were masters, patient readers of the land and its animals, who knew the herd's roads and habits as intimately as a shepherd knows his flock, where they would drink, where they would cross the rivers, where a narrow valley or a soft bog or a steep bank might let a few skilled people, working together with great care and long-laid plan, take what the camp needed and no more. It was slow, and it was clever, and it depended utterly on cooperation, on many hands and one shared understanding, and when it succeeded, the whole band was fed richly for a long while, and there was fat for the lamps and hides for the sewing, and bone for the fire, and cause for a gathering. And when the plain gave up one of its great animals, thanks were surely given, in ways we can only guess at, and I will not invent for you. A word, a gesture, a mark, a small rite of respect for the life that had become the people's life. For these were not thoughtless killers of beasts, they were the beasts' close and grateful kin, who lived by them and drew them on stone in wonder, and buried their own dead sometimes with the antlers and the ivory near them, as though to carry the great herds along even into the long sleep. The taking was never careless. The plain fed the people, and the people in their fashion kept faith with the plain, and feel beneath all the practical use of it the sheer companionship of living among such animals, for the herds were not merely food and hide and bone to the people, they were the neighbours of their whole existence, the great moving population of their world, known and watched and thought about and dreamed of every day of every life. A child of the steppe grew up learning the animals the way you learned your letters, the walk of the mammoth and the trot of the horse, the bark of the reindeer and the lowing of the bison, which tracks in the snow were fresh and which were old, what the tilt of a distant herd's movement meant about the coming weather. To know the animals was to be a person. The old ones who knew them best were the treasures of the band, their long memories a kind of living map of the plain. And the animals, in their turn, filled the people's inner world as they filled the outer one, their shapes carved into ivory and bone, painted onto stone, pressed into every story and every song, so that the whole imagination of the age wore antlers and tusks and shaggy hide, We will meet them again, you and I, glowing on the walls of the deep caves, drawn there by lamplight with a tenderness that reaches across 20,000 years and takes you by the heart. But even out here on the open plain, before ever we go underground, you can feel how it was, a world shared, closely and daily. With the great warm beasts, a human life lived not against the animals but among them, in a long, watchful, grateful company that lasted the whole age of the ice. So picture the herds once more, softly as the day goes down, for the light on the mammoth steppe at evening was a thing to still the heart, and it is a good thing to fall asleep beside. The low sun reddens and sinks toward the rim of the grass. The great animals graze on, gilded now, their long shadows thrown out endless across the gold. The mammoths move slowly toward the sheltered ground where they will pass the night. The calves leaning drowsy against the mothers, the reindeer settle, the horses drift, the whole vast breathing multitude of the plain easing, as everything eases, toward rest. The wind drops with the light, as it so often does. The first star stands up in the east, and across the darkening grass, from a fold in the hills, there rises a thin blue thread of smoke. The first you have seen tonight, climbing straight and slow into the still cold air. And where there is smoke there is fire, and where there is fire there are people, gathered close and warm at the day's end, waiting for the hunters to come in. Toward that thread of smoke, and the small bright fire beneath it, let us drift now, out of the great cold plain and into the warm circle of the light, for it is time, at last, to sit down by the oldest hearth in the world, and learn the dearest thing the people of the ice ever knew, the tending of the flame. Come in then out of the great cold light, and sit down by the fire, for there is always room by the fire, and it has been waiting for you, in a sense, for a very long time. Here it is, a low bright bed of flame in a shallow ring of blackened stones, set in the middle of the swept and trodden ground, ringed round by the people of the band sitting close, their faces lit warm and gold on the fireward side, and lost in soft shadow behind, their hands held out to the heat, their eyes half closed against the drowsy shimmer of it. There is nothing in all the age of ice more important than this, nothing the people carried more carefully, guarded more jealously, or loved more simply than the small living fire at the centre of their lives. It was warmth in a world made of cold. It was light in the long dark. It was the hearth on which the food was cooked, and the lamp by which the night's work was done, and the guard that kept the dark at bay, and the gathering place where the whole band drew together at the day's end into one warm knot of company. The fire was the heart of the home, and in truth, in that age, the fire very nearly was the home. Wherever it burned, that was the centre of the world, and it was not easily got, which is why it was so dearly kept. To make fire new from nothing was slow and skilled and uncertain work, the patient spinning of a hard stick against a soft hearth-board until the friction wore out a little dust of glowing char, or the sharp practised strike of the right stone against a nodule of ironstone, over and over, spilling a spray of tiny fierce sparks down into a waiting nest of the driest tinder, teased fine as hair, a scrap of dry fungus, a wisp of down, a shred of last year's grass. And then the breath, the leaning close, the slow steady breath upon the caught spark, coaxing the faint red glow to spread, and swell, and at last with a little rush burst into a first small flame that had to be fed. At once, tenderly with the smallest twigs, then larger, until the fire stood up and lived. Anyone who has ever knelt over a stubborn campfire in a cold wind knows the whole small drama of it, the willing and the patience and the sudden gladness when it catches, and the people of the ice knew it far better than we, and needed it far more. So they did not make fire fresh each day if they could help it. They kept it. They fed the flame all through the day, and banked it low and warm beneath ash at night, and in the morning stirred it back to life from its own deep embers, and when the band went travelling across the plain, someone carried the fire with them. A smouldering ember cradled in a nest of moss and bark inside a horn or a fold of hide, tended and breathed upon along the way, so that the flame that warmed them at the new camp was the very same flame, unbroken, that had warmed them at the old. Think of that. Softly, a single fire, kept alight, hand to hand, day upon day, moving with the people across the plain. One small continuous warmth carried faithfully through a whole cold world. It is one of the tenderest things our kind has ever done. And so there was in many a band a keeper of the fire, some patient, careful soul, perhaps an elder past the hardest labours, whose honoured work it was to feed the flame and bank it and carry it, and never, never let it die. It is a homely task and a sacred one at once, and you can feel the weight of it, to hold in your keeping the warmth of everyone you love, the light they will come home to, the hearth their children will sleep beside. To let the fire go out was a small disaster. To keep it burning through the bitterest night was a quiet daily heroism that no one thought heroic at all, any more than you think it heroic to keep your own house warm. The firekeeper stirred the coals in the blue dark before dawn while the others slept, and fed it the day's fuel, and knew its moods. How it drew in this wind, how it smoked in that damp, when it wanted air and when it wanted feeding. And the fuel itself was a labour of the cold country, for on the treeless plain there was little wood, a precious armful of dwarf willow gathered from a stream bank, driftwood snagged along a river, and most of all, the dried dung of the great herds, gathered from the grass and stacked to dry, which burned slow and hot and steady, and without which the fires of the open steppe could scarcely have been kept at all. Even the great bones of the mammoth, rich with fat, were fed to the flames where wood was scarce, and burned with a low fierce heat far into the night. Nothing on that plain was wasted, not the dung, not the bone, not the smallest twig, for all of it, in the end, was warmth, and warmth was life. Now feel the fire itself as the people felt it with your whole drowsy body, for a fire is one of the oldest and surest doorways into sleep, and this one has been burning for 20,000 years to bring you to its edge. Feel the heat of it on your face and your open hands, that lovely living heat that comes in soft waves and presses the cold gently back, and the cool of the great night at your back, so that you sit poised between the two, warm before and cool behind, wrapped in your furs, needing nothing. Hear the fire, the soft ceaseless flutter and hiss of the flames, the sudden small crack of a twig giving way, the settling sigh as a burnt log collapses into coals and sends up a slow drift of orange sparks that rise and wander, and wink out among the stars. Smell the wood smoke, that oldest and homeliest of all good smells, the smell that has meant safety and supper and gathering to human beings since long before there were houses or words for houses. And watch the fire, as everyone has always watched the fire, with the eyes going soft and unfocused, following the flames up and down as they lean and curl and climb. Gold and amber, and at the hot heart of the coals, a deep clean glowing rose, a small bright endlessly moving thing that asks nothing of you, and holds your gaze, and empties your mind, and draws you down, breath by slowing breath, toward rest. The people stared into it just so, all those thousands of years ago, at the end of their long days, their thoughts loosening, their eyes growing heavy. And if you feel your own eyes growing heavy now, watching the same flames in your mind, then you are doing exactly what they did, and exactly what this hour is for. And there was safety in it, deep and certain, the safety that let a whole band lie down and sleep in the open heart of a wild plain. For the great cold world had its wanderers of the night, the wolf packs trotting the far dark, the cave lion pale and huge and mostly unseen, the hyena, the bear. But fire was the one thing the night walkers would not cross. A ring of firelight was a wall the darkness could not pass, a boundary drawn in warmth and light around the sleeping people, and beyond it the animals of the dark kept their distance and went their own ways, and the people knew it, and slept. If far off in the night a wolf lifted its long voice to the moon, or something heavy moved once in the blackness out beyond the grass, no one need be afraid, for the fire stood guard, and everyone within its light knew, even in their sleep, that the dark was outside, only outside, and the warmth and the safety were here, drawn close around the flame. It is the very same knowing that keeps you easy tonight behind your own walls and your own bolted door, with the cold night pressed against the glass, the ancient certainty that here, inside, by the warmth, all is well. The fire taught our kind that certainty. The fire was the first safe place there ever was. So the fire was the whole heart of it, the warmth and the light and the guard and the gathering, all in one small living flame at the centre of the world. And every hearth that has ever burned since, every stove and lamp and candle, every heater ticking softly in a winter room, every glow you have ever drawn near to on a cold night, is the direct and unbroken descendant of these first tended fires of the plain. But a fire in the open, for all its wonder, is a fire half lost to the wind and the cold, forever giving its heat away to the enormous night. And so the people did the next great thing, the thing that turned a fire into a home. They built a wall around it, and a roof over it, and gathered its warmth in. They raised shelters, tents of hide bent over on their slender poles, and, in the coldest and boldest country of all, great domed houses built of the very bones of the mammoth, and drew the fire inside, and drew themselves in around it, and shut the cold out at the door. Let your breath go slow and deep now, as slow as the banking of the coals for the night, and let us leave the open fire and go in, out of the wind, into the low warm dark of the first houses our kind ever made, where the flame burns snug against the cold and the whole family sleeps around it, safe beneath a roof against the enormous winter of the world. Duck your head then and come in through the low doorway, out of the wind, and feel at once, as you straighten inside, the great soft difference of it, the wind gone, cut off clean at the threshold, its endless push and roar fallen away to a muffled murmur beyond the hide walls, the air still and warm and close, and smelling of wood smoke and fur and cooking, and the honest human warmth of the people who live here. This is a tent of the mammoth steppe, and it is the oldest kind of made home there is, a frame of long slender poles, of wood where wood could be found, and of the great curved bones and tusks of the mammoth where it could not, set up in a ring and leaned together at the top. And over that frame a covering of hides, many hides, scraped and softened and sewn edge to edge into one great warm skin and stretched taut over all, weighted down at the bottom against the wind with a heavy ring of stones or bone or packed earth. It is not large inside, and it is not meant to be. It is meant to be warm, and it is, a small round world of stillness and heat, sealed against the enormous cold, with the whole shrieking winter shut safely out beyond a wall no thicker than a hide. To step from the plain into a tent was to cross, in a single stride, from the coldest world our kind has ever lived in to one of the cosiest. And the people crossed it every day of their lives, and knew, as you are learning tonight, exactly what a blessing an inside is. And the making of such a shelter was the shared and patient art of the whole band, women and men together, and it repaid every hour spent on it. The poles or the bones were set and lashed with sinew and thong. The great hide cover, the labour of many seasons of scraping and sewing, was hauled up and drawn over and pegged down. The edges were banked with earth or snow to seal the last of the draughts. A low opening was left for the door, hung with a flap of heavy hide that could be dropped against the weather. And at the very top, where the poles met, a small gap was left for the smoke of the inside fire to find its slow way out into the sky. Within, the floor was the swept and trodden earth, sometimes dug down a little into the ground so that the shelter sat low and snug and out of the wind's reach, and over the floor were laid the beds of the people, thick soft piles of fur and hide, warm as anything you have ever slept beneath, arranged around the walls with the hearth in the middle, each person or each family with their own accustomed place, their own nest of skins, exactly as you have your own side of your own bed tonight. There is a deep sameness across all the 20,000 years in how a home is made, a wall against the weather, a fire at the centre, and soft warm places round it where the loved ones lie down. You know it in your bones, you are lying in it now, but in the coldest, boldest country of all, out on the far eastern reaches of the mammoth steppe, where the winters were longest and the wood was scarcest and the great herds thickest, the people did a thing so astonishing that those who uncover its traces today kneel beside them in wonder. They built their winter houses out of mammoth-bone. Picture it, slowly, for it is one of the marvels of the age. On a low rise above a frozen river, a cluster of great round dwellings, each one raised from the mighty bones of many mammoths, scores of them, whole herds worth, gathered surely over long years from the plain and from the places where the great animals had died, the huge curved jawbones stacked chin down in neat overlapping herringbone courses to make the lower walls, the long leg bones and shoulder blades set above, the vast tusks arching over the doorway in a great pale gate, the whole heavy dome of bone then covered over with hides and turf and packed earth against the wind and the cold. A single such house might have taken the labour of many people many weeks, and stood not for a season, but for years, returned to winter after winter. A true and permanent home, warm and domed and enduring, built of the very bones of the beasts that fed and clothed the builders. There is something almost unbearably tender in it, when you sit with it a while, that the great animals gave the people not only their food and their furs, but the very walls of their houses, that a family should pass the long dark winters gathered warm and safe inside a shelter raised from the bones of the mammoth, sleeping, in a sense, in the great slow heart of the herd. And where I am picturing more than we can prove, the exact warmth, the exact feeling of a winter passed inside those bone walls, I tell you so gently, but the houses themselves were real, and their ringed foundations of stacked bone lie in the earth to this day, patient and astounding, the oldest architecture our kind has left. And around such houses grew the first true winter camps, small clusters of dwellings set close together on the good sheltered ground, a little village of the ice, where several families passed the darkest months side by side. There were workplaces out of doors for the fine days, hearths for the shared fires, and, this is a touch the diggers love, deep pits dug down into the hard frozen earth, the everlasting cold of the ground below keeping meat and fat frozen and sweet through the whole long winter, the oldest cold stores in the world, a larder cut into the ice itself. For the people of the eastern steppe did not always wander, where the living was rich enough. They stayed, gathering in the autumn what the winter would need, and settling in against the cold in their bone and hide houses to wait out the dark together, much as long ages later and far to the south, other people would settle by their springs and their rivers and build the first towns. It is the same old human turning, the same deep wish to have a place, to stay, to make one spot on the wide cold earth warm and known and one's own, and to fill it with the people one loves, and to wait out the dark inside it together. The bone houses of the ice were among the very first answers our kind ever gave to that wish. They were home, in the fullest sense the word has ever held. Come inside one now, on a deep winter's night, and feel the whole warmth of it close around you. The heavy door flap is dropped and pegged against the black cold outside. The small fire burns low and steady in its ring of stones at the centre, its smoke drawing up thin and blue through the gap at the crown, and the light of it moves gold and soft over the curved bone walls, over the hanging furs, over the faces of the family gathered close. It is warm, truly warm, warm enough that a child sleeps with one arm thrown free of the covers, warm enough that the frost of the outer world is a rumour, a thing you remember rather than feel. The air is thick with the good smells of an inside, smoke and roasting fat and cured hide, and the particular warm smell of people who belong together. Outside, you know, the wind is running huge and empty over the plain, and the cold stands deep enough to still a river. The great dark presses on every side against the thin warm shell of the house. But in here, none of it can reach you. In here there is firelight, and fur, and the low voices of your people, and the smell of supper, and the whole vast winter shut out beyond the door. This is the thing our kind learned to make in the age of ice, and never unlearned, an inside. A pocket of held warmth in a cold world, a place to be safe in while the dark goes by, and notice, drowsily, how much of the home is made of gathered warmth held still. How the whole cleverness of the shelter is simply to catch the fire's heat and the body's heat, and keep them from flying away into the night. The low roof holds the warm air down, the banked earth seals the draughts, the crowd of sleeping bodies warms the air they breathe, the thick furs hold each small heat close against each skin. It is the same cleverness, exactly, that is keeping you warm this very moment, your roof, your walls, your covers drawn close, the small furnace of your own resting body cradled in the warmth it makes. Across 20,000 years, the art has not changed at all in its heart. Gather the warmth and keep it, and lie down inside it, and let the cold have the outside. The people of the ice were the great early masters of that art, and they have handed it down to you, unbroken, all the way to the bed you are lying in tonight. You are, in the truest sense, sleeping in a house they first imagined. So let the wind run on outside, and pay it no mind, you are within now, and within is warm. Let the fire burn low, let the furs lie heavy and soft, let the bone walls curve their old shelter over you. And notice, as your eyes grow heavier, one more small warm thing happening by the hearth, for the day's great labours are done, and in the golden firelight someone has drawn a little closer to the flame, and taken up a folded skin, and a slender pointed sliver of bone, and begun, with slow sure fingers, to sew. It is the quietest work in the house, and one of the most important that our kind has ever done, for the warm sewn clothing these hands are making was more even than the fire or the house. The true secret of surviving the cold, the thing that let a naked, tropical, thin-skinned creature walk out and live upon a plain of ice. Let us lean close, in the warm and the firelight, and watch the needle go in and out, and learn how the people of the ice clothed themselves against the whole cold weight of the world. There is nothing to do but watch, and be warm, and let your breath go slow. The needle rises, the needle dips, and the story sews itself gently on toward sleep. Watch the hands then in the firelight, for of all the arts the people of the ice possessed, this quiet one, the sewing, was perhaps the truest secret of their whole survival, and it is a lovely thing to grow drowsy watching. In one hand, the folded skin, soft and pale and worked supple as cloth. In the other, the needle, a slender splinter of bone or ivory, ground round and smooth and sharp to a fine point, and pierced near its top. And this is the small miracle. The little hole no wider than a grass stem, bored patiently through the hard bone, with a stone point spun back and forth for who knows how long, pierced with an eye, a true eye, through which a fine thread of sinew is passed. The eyed needle. It seems the smallest thing in the world, lying there in a worker's palm, no longer than your finger. And yet it may be one of the most important tools our kind has ever made, for with it, and only with it, could skins be sewn snugly and finely into fitted, closed, layered clothing, and only such clothing could hold a soft, warm-blooded body alive out on the open ice. Before the needle, people wrapped and draped themselves in skins, and shivered at every gap. With the needle they could tailor warmth itself, cut it to the shape of the body, close every seam against the wind, and walk out clothed like the very animals whose furs they wore. The whole cold half of the world was opened to our kind by a splinter of bone with a hole in it. Hold that wonder gently as you watch the needle rise and dip, in the patient hand. And before ever the needle could sew, there was the long, skilled, tender labour of the hides, the turning of a raw animal skin into something soft and warm and wearable, which was among the great daily works of the people, and most often the deep expertise of the women. The fresh hide was pegged out and scraped clean of every scrap of flesh and fat with a keen-edged blade of stone, worked and worked until it lay clean. Then it was softened, rubbed with fat and brains and worked between the hands, wetted and stretched and kneaded and chewed and rubbed again, over hours, over days, the tireless patient working of the fibres until the stiff skin gave up its stiffness and became supple, pliable, soft as good cloth and nearly as strong. Some skins were kept with the fur on, thick and warm for the outer garments and the bedding. Some were worked bare and fine for the inner layers against the skin. It was long work, and hard on the hands, and it never ended, for clothing wore out and was mended and remade, and the band was always in need. And it was the near invisible foundation on which every other thing rested, for without the softened hides there were no clothes, and without the clothes there was no living on the plain at all. When you picture the survivors of the ice, picture not only the hunters out on the grass, but these patient workers by the fire, scraping and softening and sewing, for they clothed the whole people, and the whole people lived by their skill. And what they made, with the softened hides and the sinew thread and the eyed bone needle, was warmth cut to the shape of a human being. Layer upon layer of it, an inner garment worn soft against the skin, and over it an outer one with the fur turned out to shed the snow, so that between the layers a still cushion of warm air was held close about the body. The very same trick, exactly, by which your own layered covers keep you warm tonight. A hooded coat that closed snug about the face, leaving only the eyes and cheeks to the air, trousers sewn close to the leg, boots of soft hide, stuffed with dry grass for warmth, bound about the ankle against the snow, mittens on the hands, sometimes sewn right onto the sleeves so a child could not lose them, exactly as a child's mittens are strung on a cord today. The seams were closed fine and tight so the wind could find no way in. The openings were drawn close with thongs. The whole was fitted and snug and layered and closed. An entire small warm climate carried about with the body, so complete that a person so dressed could sit out a bitter wind, or sleep on the open snow, and stay warm within their own small held heat. It was, in its way, as clever as any house, a shelter you could wear, a hearth warmth sewn into a second skin, and it was the plainest possible proof of the people's mastery, that a creature born for warm places had, by sheer skill and patience, made itself entirely at home in the coldest country on the earth. But do not imagine, for a moment, that this clothing was merely useful, merely a grim armour against the cold, for the people of the ice, like people everywhere and always, loved to make beautiful the things they wore, and dressed themselves not only for warmth, but for pride, and belonging, and delight. They sewed onto their garments long rows and patterns of small beads, beads carved one by one from ivory, drilled and strung and stitched in their thousands, so many that the making of them alone must have taken untold patient hours, beads of shell carried from far away, and the teeth of the fox and the deer pierced and hung, and pendants of amber and bone. We know this, and here is one of the most touching things the frozen earth has ever given up, because now and then the people laid their beloved dead to rest dressed in their finest, and the soft clothing has long since gone to dust. But the beads remain, lying in the earth in the very rows and shapes in which they were sewn, so that we can see, still, the outline of a hood thick sewn with ivory, the bands of beads down the sleeves and across the breast and around the boots, thousands upon thousands of them adorning a single burial, the garments of someone deeply loved, sent into the long sleep clothed in a whole winter's worth of patient beauty. Sit with that a moment, gently, for it tells you everything about these people that the bones and the tools cannot. They were not bare survivors. They were us, dressing with care, adorning what they wore, honouring one another with beauty, taking the trouble, in the middle of an ice age, to make a coat not only warm, but lovely. The wish to be beautiful is as old as the wish to be warm, and on the mammoth steppe the two were sewn, quite literally, into the very same garment. And feel, most of all, the love in it for clothing, in that world, was warmth given from one person to another, made by patient hands for a particular beloved body, and there is no plainer way to say, I want you to be warm, I want you to live, than to sew someone a coat against the cold. Picture the mother or the grandmother sitting late by the fire while the others sleep, sewing a small warm garment for a child, measuring it against the little sleeping shape, closing each seam with care, thinking, as she works, of the small body it will keep from the cold, the way a parent has thought over a child's warmth in every generation there has ever been. Picture the new boots made ready before the winter, the mittens mended, the hood lined thicker against the deepest cold, the whole slow tender apparatus of keeping one's people warm, carried out night after night in the firelight, needle and sinew and softened hide, an act of love repeated so often and so quietly that no one ever thought to call it love at all. It was simply what you did for the ones who were yours. You kept them warm. And is that not, when you come down to it, the oldest worker family there is? The thing that is being done for you tonight, by the warm room and the soft covers, and whoever, near or far, has ever wanted you warm and safe and well. To be clothed against the cold is to be loved. The people of the ice knew it in their hands, stitch by patient stitch, 20,000 years ago. So there they are then, warm at last against the whole enormous winter of the world, housed in hide and bone, wrapped in sewn fur, layered and hooded and snug, the fire burning at the centre of the shelter and the beds of soft skin laid round it. They have made an inside against the outside, they have made a hearth against the dark, they have made a second warm skin to wear against the cold. Everything the great plain could do to them, they have gently and cleverly turned aside, not by conquering the ice, which no one could conquer, but by making, wherever they went, a small warm human place to be, and carrying it with them. And now, warm and clothed and sheltered, there is only one more need to meet before the long night can be given over wholly to rest and firelight and story. The oldest need of all, and the most companionable, the need that has always drawn the people close around the hearth at the day's end. They must be fed. There is food in the cold store and food on the fire, fat rendering in a warm pot and roots roasting in the coals, and the whole shelter is filling with the good smell of a supper made ready. Let your breath go slow and deep, and let us turn, warm and drowsy, toward the food of the ice, toward the cooking fire, and the shared meal, and the deep old comfort of a family fed and gathered in the light. Now the food of the ice was far richer and far more varied than the old grim pictures allow, and the meeting of it is a warm and companionable thing to drift toward. So let us sit by the cooking fire a while and be fed. For it was never only meat. Though meat there was in plenty, the people of the cold were gatherers as much as hunters, and knew their whole plain as a great slow larder that gave something in every season, if you knew where and when to look. In the brief bright blaze of the northern summer, those few precious weeks when the sun swung high and the snow drew back, and the whole plain flushed green and flowering almost overnight, the gathering was rich indeed, berries reddening and darkening on the low bushes along the streams, gathered by the handful and the basketful. Roots and tubers dug from the softened ground, starchy and filling, the tender greens of the short season. The seeds of the grasses, birds' eggs from the marshes where the wildfowl nested in clamouring clouds, fish drawn from the cold clear rivers. The women and the children, most often, were the keepers of this gentler harvest, and it mattered enormously, for the gathered foods gave what the meat could not, the sweetness and the greenness and the roundness of a full and balanced eating, and a wise band lived by the basket quite as much as by the spear. Picture the summer gatherers coming in at the long slow dusk, hands stained purple with berries, baskets heavy, tired and glad. There is nothing bleak in it at all. It is only the old good work of bringing home the season's plenty, done under a low gold midnight sun. And the summer's true purpose, beyond the day's eating, was the winter's store, for the great art of surviving the cold was not merely to find food but to keep it, to carry the plenty of the bright months across the long dark ones. And in this the people were patient masters. The summer's berries were dried, or crushed and mixed with fat to keep. The roots were stored. And above all the meat of the good hunts was preserved against the hungry season, cut into thin strips and dried hard in the wind and the cold, or smoked slow over the fire until it would keep for months. Light to carry and full of strength, packed away too, in those deep pits dug down into the everlastingly frozen ground, where the cold of the earth itself held it sweet and solid through the whole winter, the oldest cold cellars in the world. A band that had gathered and dried and stored well through the summer could face the longest dark with a full larder and an easy mind, and the filling of the winter store, all through the busy light months, was the great shared labour that made the difference between a hard winter and a comfortable one. It is the same wisdom, exactly, that fills a pantry before a storm, or a cellar before the cold, the deep old human trick of sending today's plenty forward in time to feed tomorrow's need. The people of the ice were among the first great practitioners of it, and their filled pits and their racks of drying meat were as much a part of home as the fire itself. But the true treasure of the cold country's table, and here is a thing worth knowing, drowsy as you are, was fat. For in a world of great cold, lean meat alone is not enough to keep a body strong. It is fat that carries the deep warmth and the long strength a person needs to face the ice. And the people knew this in their very bones, and prized fat above almost all other food. The rich fat of the animals was carefully saved, rendered slow over the fire into a keeping store, eaten with the lean meat and the dried berries, burned in the little lamps, and the marrow, the soft rich marrow hidden in the long bones, was a delicacy loved above nearly everything. the bones cracked open, and the warm marrow scooped out and savoured, or set by the fire to melt. To a hungry person come in from the cold, a bone full of warm marrow was one of the sweetest things the world could offer, and the fat and the marrow together were the deep fuel of the whole cold country life, the concentrated warmth that let the body burn bright against the freeze. There is no need to find this strange, you have felt its distant echo yourself, on some bitter day when nothing would do but something rich and warm and nourishing. Some deep and comforting food that seemed to reach the very centre of you and light a fire there. That is the old cold country wisdom, still speaking in your body. Against great cold, eat richly, and be warm from within. And the cooking of it all, in a world without a single pot of clay or metal, was a clever and homely art. Much was simply roasted, laid on the hot stones at the fire's edge, or spitted on a bone or a stick, and turned slowly over the coals until it hissed and browned and filled the whole shelter with its smell. Roots buried in the embers to bake soft in their skins, fish laid on a flat hot stone. But the people wanted warm food and warm drink too, broth and stew and rendered fat, and for that they found a way to boil water with no pot at all. They lined a pit, or a fold of hide, or a stomach bag hung on a frame, with water, and into it they dropped stones that had been heated red-hot in the fire, one after another, each one hissing and giving up its heat to the water, until the whole was steaming and boiling and cooking the meat and the roots within. Stone boiling, we call it now, a patient, ingenious trick. And by it the people of the ice made the first warm soups and broths and stews our kind ever supped. Hot, nourishing food to thaw the cold out of a body at the day's end. Imagine the comfort of it, come in from the freezing plain, and be handed a warm, rich broth, thick with meat and marrow fat and soft roots, steaming in the firelight. The whole long history of every warm bowl of soup ever pressed into cold hands begins in these hot stone pits on the mammoth steppe, and the comfort is exactly precisely the same across all the 20,000 years. Now feel the shared meal itself, for it was the warm daily heart of the band's life together, and one of the deepest of its bonds. When the food was ready, it was not each for their own, it was shared out, passed hand to hand around the fire, the whole band eating together of what the whole band's labour had won, the hunter's meat and the gatherer's roots and berries all become one common supper, given round the circle so that everyone was fed. And there was a deep old generosity in the sharing, a care that the sharing went rightly. Often the old ones and the little ones were seen to first, the best portions pressed on the elder whose knowing guided the band, and the child whose growing was its future. The good hunter gave his catch to the whole company, and took his own share as one among many, and was honoured not for keeping, but for giving. For this sharing was the very thing that held the band together against the enormous world. No single person, however skilled, could face the ice alone. Only the band could, pooling its every skill and every catch, feeding its weak along with its strong, so that all lived or none did. The shared meal was that truth made warm and daily and delicious. We eat together, therefore we live. And so the supper round the fire was never only food. It was the band renewing itself, every single evening, in the plainest and most companionable way there is, passing the good warm food from hand to hand in the firelight, and being, in the passing, one people. And after a great hunt, when the plain had given richly, there was the feast, and the feast was gladness itself, and there is nothing in it to trouble your rest, only plenty and warmth and joy. When much food came in at once, the band ate deep and long and merrily, for meat did not keep forever, and a time of plenty was a time to rejoice in, and neighbouring bands might be called in to share it. drawn across the plain by the news of the good fortune, so that the feast became a gathering, a meeting of kin and friends not seen since the last such gathering, a time of faces and news and matches made and old ties renewed. Picture the fires built high, the meat roasting in plenty, the marrow bones cracked, the fat and the berries and the good stored things all brought out. The people gathered close and warm and full, the talk running late, the children darting among the grown-ups, a bone flute lifting its 3 soft notes over the murmur, someone beginning perhaps to sing. The whole hard patient year of gathering and storing and enduring the cold flowered, at such a time, into a night of pure warm human gladness, full bellies, dear faces, firelight, and the deep animal contentment of a people well fed and safe and together. It is the same gladness, exactly, of every feast our kind has ever held since, and its root is here, on the winter plain in the firelit plenty after a good hunt. So let yourself be fed, now in your mind, warm broth and rich marrow, and sweet dried berries and roasted root handed to you round the fire, and feel the old deep contentment of a full belly in a warm place at the end of a long day, that heaviness, that ease, that slow sweet sinking of a body that wants for nothing and need do nothing more. It is one of the surest of all the roads into sleep. The full and firelit ease of the well-fed. The people knew it, drooping around their hearths with the supper done, and you may feel it now, drawing you gently down. There is nothing left to do tonight. You have been warmed and housed and clothed and fed. And when a people is warm and safe and full and gathered close in the firelight against the long dark, then, and only then, does the deepest and most wonderful of all their doings begin to stir. For the mind that is no longer cold or hungry or afraid is free, at last to wonder. Some of that same rendered fat that fed the people is being poured now into a small hollowed stone, and a little wick of moss set in it, and lit, a lamp, a tiny steady flame to carry in the hand. And with that lamp, some of the people are about to do the most astonishing thing in all this long night story. They are going to go down into the deep dark heart of the earth to make, by its small light, the first great pictures our kind ever made. Let your breath go slow, and take up the little lamp, and let us follow them down. Far to the south and west of the great open steppe, where the cold plains gave way to kinder hill country cut with rivers and gorges, the earth itself opened here and there into caves, long deep hollows and galleries worn in the pale stone, running back from the daylight into a darkness older and more complete than any night on the surface of the world. And into that darkness, 20,000 years ago and more, the people went, carrying their little lamps of burning fat, threading back and back along the winding passages, sometimes for a very long way, past the reach of any daylight, into the still cold silent heart of the rock. And there, on the deep walls, by the small trembling flame, they made the pictures that still, after all these thousands of years, stop the breath of everyone who comes upon them. Let us go with them now, softly, holding our own small light, for there is nothing frightening in the dark of these caves, only wonder, and a deep old hush, and the most beautiful thing our kind had yet made. Follow the lamp. Watch the pool of gold it throws move along the pale stone. Feel the cool still air, the silence so complete you can hear your own slow heart. And come around the turn of the passage, into the great chamber, and lift the lamp, and let the animals come out of the dark. For they are everywhere, all at once, glowing up out of the stone as the light finds them, horses, whole herds of horses, manes bristling, galloping across the rock, great bison, heavy-shouldered and bearded, turning to look, wild cattle with sweeping horns, huge upon the wall. The largest of them longer than a person is tall. Red deer and reindeer with branching antlers, the shaggy mammoth, the long-horned woolly rhinoceros, and here and there, watchful in the deeper shadow, the pale forms of the great cats, the lions of the cold. The whole living plain is here, brought down into the dark and set glowing on the stone, the very herds we watched moving over the gold grass, caught now in ochre and black and earthen red, running forever along the walls of the deep earth. And they are not stiff, not crude, not the clumsy scratchings you might expect from so unthinkably long ago. They are alive. The horses gallop, the bison toss their heads, the herds surge and overlap and pour along the rock as though the stone itself were the plain, and these its living multitudes, frozen for one heartbeat in mid-movement and about to sweep on. Whoever made them had watched the animals with a lifetime's loving attention and knew them utterly, the exact set of a horse's neck, the heavy roll of a bison's shoulder, the way a deer lifts its head to listen, and had the astonishing skill to set all that knowing down on stone, by lamplight, so surely and so beautifully that 20,000 years later you stand before it with your heart in your throat. Hold the lamp up and turn slowly, and let them surround you, the whole warm herd of the world, glowing gold and red in the dark, painted with a tenderness that reaches across all that time, and takes you gently by the hand. And feel the skill of it more closely, for it deepens the wonder rather than dimming it. The painters ground their colours from the earth itself, red and yellow and brown from ochre, deep black from charcoal and burnt bone, and mixed them with fat or water, and laid them on with pads of moss and fur, with frayed sticks with their very fingers, and sometimes blew them in a fine mist straight from the mouth or through a hollow bone, so that the colour softened and shaded across the stone like the real dappling of a hide. They used the living shape of the rock too with a cunning that feels almost like magic. A swelling of the wall became the round belly of a horse, a natural ridge became the arch of a back. The hollow became the curve of a haunch, so that the animal seemed to push out of the stone into the flicker of the lamp, half carved by the rock and half drawn by the hand. They built up scaffolds to reach the high places. They came back over long years, over lifetimes, over the passing of many generations, to add and to renew, so that some of these deep galleries hold the work of grandparents and grandchildren and their grandchildren after them, a slow gathering of pictures made in the same holy dark across more time than separates us from the building of the first cities. This was no idle scratching. This was the patient, skilled, devoted labour of true artists, working in the hardest of all places to work, by the smallest of all lights, to make something as fine and as lasting as human hands could make. And they succeeded so completely that we have never, in all the ages since, entirely surpassed them. And among the great animals, again and again, in cave after cave, there is a smaller and more intimate mark that will reach into you more directly than all the galloping herds. The print of a human hand, sometimes pressed in wet colour straight onto the stone, more often outlined in a soft blown mist of pigment, the hand held flat against the rock and the colour sprayed all around it, so that when the hand is lifted away its clean pale shape remains, ringed in red or black, held up forever against the wall of the deep earth. A hand, just a hand, a real hand, a particular hand, large or small, a grown one or, heartbreakingly, sometimes the small hand of a child, pressed to the stone in the lamplight and traced round and left there 20,000 years ago in the dark under the hills. And it says, across all that unimaginable gulf of time, the simplest and most human thing that has ever been said. The thing beneath all the pictures and all the words our kind has ever made. I was here. I am real. I was here, and I lifted my hand, and I touched this stone, and I want you to know it. Hold your own hand up a moment, drowsy in the dark of your room, and feel how it would fit against that outline. Feel the person on the other side of the 20,000 years, reaching back toward you exactly as you reach toward them. There is no distance, really. There has never been any distance. A hand pressed to a wall in the firelight is a hand pressed to a wall in the firelight, whether it happened last night or before the ice melted. And the child who left that small print in the deep cave is as near to you, in this quiet hour, as your own breath. And why they did it, why they went so deep, into such darkness, at such labour, to make these glowing herds and pressed hands, where almost no one would ever see them, that softly we do not know, and I will not pretend to you that we do. This was not for survival. A painted horse fed no one, warmed no one, sheltered no one from the cold. This was something else entirely, something that rose in the human spirit once the body was safe and warm and fed. The first great flowering of the thing that has driven our kind ever since, the need to make and to mean and to reach beyond the plain facts of living toward something deeper. Perhaps the caves were holy places, and the painting a kind of prayer or magic, a drawing near to the great animals on whom all life depended, a way of honouring them, or calling them, or giving thanks. Perhaps the deep dark chamber was a place of ceremony, where the young were brought to learn the sacred things by lamplight amid the glowing herds. Perhaps it was the telling of stories we can no longer hear, or the marking of the turning seasons, or something stranger and more wonderful than any guess of ours. We cannot know. The painters left the pictures, but not their meaning. And where I can only wonder, I will only wonder, and tell you honestly that I do. But this much we can feel, standing here in the gold flicker with the animals all around, that human beings, 20,000 years ago, in the middle of an age of ice, took the trouble to go down into the deep earth and make something beautiful and meaningful and utterly unnecessary to mere survival, because they were people, whole people, with the same hunger you carry for wonder and meaning and beauty, and that hunger is as old as we are, and it was already, back then, already blazing. For this, hold it gently as the lamplight wavers, is the biggest small thing in all tonight's long story. The moment our kind first reached past the getting of warmth and food and toward the making of meaning, the first art, the first pictures, the deep root from which every image our kind has ever made comes down. Every painting in every gallery, every drawing a child brings home, every picture on every wall of the sleeping world tonight, every carved and coloured and crafted beautiful thing, all of it begins here, in the fat lamp glow of these deep caves, with a hand that ground red earth and reached up to the stone, and drew a horse so true it gallops still. The people of the ice did not only survive the cold, they looked at their hard and beautiful world and they answered it, with beauty of their own, made freely, made for wonder, made to last. And it has lasted. It is lasting now, this very night, glowing quietly in the dark under the southern hills exactly where they left it, the oldest art of our kind, waiting in the patient silence for the next lamp to come round the passage and lift, and find the herds still running. So take one last slow look, by the failing light, the horses, the great bulls, the pale lions in the shadow, the small pressed hands, the whole warm living plain gathered glowing on the stone, and then let us turn, and carry the little lamp back up the winding passage, up toward the far faint grey of the cave mouth and the cold clean air and the enormous starry night, up and out and home, back to the warm shelter and the low fire and the gathered family, where the long winter night is only half gone and there is time yet, deep warm time, for the oldest and gentlest of all the doings by the fire. For the same people who painted the herds in the dark also sang, and carved and told long stories in the firelight, and made small beautiful things to hold in the hand. And it is beside that fire, among those quiet, warm, human pleasures of the long dark nights, that we shall spend the last of our waking hours before sleep comes for you in earnest. Let your breath go slow, let the lamp burn low, and let us go back up, out of the deep, toward the firelight and the voices of the people, waiting for us in the warm. And so we come back up into the warm, into the long heart of a winter night in the shelter, where the whole band is gathered close about the low fire, with the dark and the cold shut out beyond the walls, and this, of all the scenes in tonight's long story, is perhaps the one to sink most deeply into, for it is the warmest, and the most human, and the nearest to the very thing you are doing now. The winter of the Mammoth Steppe was long, and its nights were very long indeed, the dark coming early and staying late, hour upon hour of it wrapped around the small lit world of the shelter, and the people did not fight that dark or fear it. They gathered into it. With the fire tended low and warm, and the furs drawn close, and the supper done, the whole band drew together in the firelight, the old and the young, the tired hunters and the patient workers, the children heavy-eyed and leaning against the groan, and passed the long dark hours in the oldest and gentlest of all human ways, together in the warmth, talking and telling and making small things and singing, while the winter stood huge and harmless outside the door. There was nowhere to go and nothing that needed doing until the light came back. There was only the fire, and the family, and the whole slow sweet emptiness of a night to be spent in company. It is a kind of time we have almost forgotten how to have, and your whole body knows how to want it. Let yourself have it now. For the great work of those long firelit nights, beyond all the resting and the warmth, was the telling, the passing of everything the people knew from the old to the young by the plain magic of the voice, story upon story, hour upon hour, winter upon winter. Remember that these people had no marks on clay, no letters, no way at all to set a thought down outside a living mind. Everything they knew, and they knew an enormous amount, a whole world's worth of hard-won knowledge, lived only in memory, and had to be carried forward from each generation to the next on nothing but breath and attention. And so the firelit night was the great school of the whole people. Though no one would ever have called it school, it was here, in the warm dark, that the old ones told the young where the reindeer crossed and when, which plants healed and which were best left alone, how to read the sky and the snow and the tracks, how the tools were made and the hides worked and the fires kept, and told it not as dry instruction but woven into stories, into long rich tales that held the knowing safe inside them the way a fruit holds its seed, so that a child listening drowsy by the fire drank in the wisdom of 1,000 years without ever knowing it was being taught. The old people, whose memories reached back the furthest, were the great treasures of the band, living libraries every one, holding in their grey heads the accumulated knowing of all the generations behind them, and when the people gathered close to hear an elder tell, they were doing the most important thing a people without writing can do. They were keeping the whole precious inheritance alive.
One warm night's telling at a time.
And what tales they must have been, though we can only picture them softly, for the stories themselves are the one thing that could not survive. Spoken into the firelight and gone, leaving no mark, carried only in minds that are 20,000 years dust. But people are people, and we can feel the shape of what they surely told. The tales of the great animals, the mammoth and the bison and the lion, and how they came to be, and how the people were bound to them, the tales of the ancestors, the ones who came before, the grandmothers and grandfathers whose deeds and names were kept alive in the telling. The tales of how the world was made, and why the cold came, and where the sun went in the winter, and why it always came back. The tales of far places and far journeys, of other bands and other planes, the funny stories, and the frightening but safe ones, and the ones so old that even the teller did not know how old they were. Where I am imagining, and I tell you so, but of this much we can be sure, that around those winter fires the human voice did what it has always done, and turned the hard facts of the world into stories, and the stories into meaning, and the meaning into the warm shared inheritance of a people, and that somewhere in those long-lost tales are the deep roots of every story ever told since, including, if you follow the thread back far enough through all the tellers and all the fires, the very one that is carrying you toward sleep tonight. And there was music in the shelter too, on those long nights, real music, the oldest we know of, for among the things the people made and left behind are flutes. Slender pipes carved from bird bone and from ivory, pierced with finger holes, shaped with care, that can be played still in that sound, across all the thousands of years. A clear, sweet, breathy, plaintive note that goes straight to the heart. Imagine it rising now over the low talk and the crackle of the fire. Someone lifts a bone flute to their lips and begins to play, soft and slow. A simple melody winding up and falling and winding up again. 3 notes and a turn, older than every song you know, and someone else, perhaps, keeps a soft rhythm, a tap, a beat, a low wordless singing, and the children go still to listen, and the firelight wavers, and the music fills the warm domed dark of the shelter and holds everyone gently inside it. We do not know their songs, and we never shall, but we know they had them. We know they made music in the deep of the Ice Age nights, and we know that music does to the human heart now exactly what it did then. It gathers and soothes and lifts and binds a group of people into one feeling. There has never been a human world without song. There was song here in the firelight 20,000 years ago over the sleeping plain, and it was surely sweetest of all at the day's end, low and slow, a lullaby of bone and breath easing the little ones, and the big ones down towards sleep. And in their hands, as they sat by the fire and talked and listened and half dozed, the people made small and beautiful things, for the long nights were the time for the patient fine work that the busy days had no room for. From ivory and bone and antler and soft stone they carved, little figures of the animals, a mammoth no bigger than your thumb, a horse, a lion, a swimming reindeer, carved with the same loving exactness as the great painted herds, beads by the hundred for the sewing, pendants and toggles and fine-worked tools, and the small carved figures of women, round and generous and worn smooth by handling, that the people of the whole cold world made and carried and treasured, whose meaning we can only guess at, a blessing, a mother, a charm, a holding of something dear, and guess at is all I will do. Some of these little carvings were surely playthings for the children. Some were surely holy, some were surely just the pleasure of a skilled hand making a beautiful thing by firelight for the joy of it. And all of them tell the same warm truth as the beads on the clothing and the horses on the cave wall, that these people, in the middle of the ice, made beauty as naturally as they made fire, and filled their hands and their homes and their long nights with small crafted lovely things. Because to be human is to make, and to adorn, and to hold something beautiful in the hand and be glad of it. They were not so different from you, sitting up late with your hands busy at something you love. They never were, and through it all, folded into the warm firelit heart of those nights, were the children and the old ones, and the deep tender care that passed between them. For a band was a family in the fullest sense, all its ages bound close, and the raising of the young and the honouring of the old were the warm daily work of everyone. The children learned by being among it all, always, watching the hands that carved and sewed, listening to the stories, trying the small tasks, playing at the hunt and the gathering the way children have always played at the work of their elders, tumbling and laughing and being scooped up and hushed and loved. The old ones past the hardest labours, held the honoured place by the fire, their knowing sought, their tales awaited, their long memories the treasure of all, and between the very young and the very old there was surely that special easy tenderness that so often binds them, the grandparent and the grandchild, the one with all the time and all the stories, and the other with all the questions and all the years ahead. No one in that warm circle was alone. No one was uncared for. The band held all its own, the strong carrying the weak, the old teaching the young, the whole close company wrapped together in the firelight against the enormous dark, and that holding, that binding, that warm human closeness was the deepest survival art of all, deeper than the fire, deeper than the furs, deeper than the sewn clothes and the bone houses. For it was together, only ever together, that the people faced the ice, and it was in nights exactly like this one, gathered close and warm and loving in the low firelight, that the togetherness was made and remade and kept alive. So feel now the whole warm weight of that gathered night settling towards sleep, and let it settle you along with it. The stories have wound down into murmurs, the flute has fallen still, the small carved things are set aside. The fire is banked low and glowing, its light soft and red and dying gently on the curved walls and the sleeping firs. One by one, around the warm shelter, the people are lying down, the children first, already gone, carried off mid-sentence into sleep and tucked deep into the furs, then the others, drawing the soft skins close, settling into their accustomed places, the low last words trailing off into silence. Outside, the winter night stands vast and cold and starlit over the sleeping plain, the great herds bedded down in the folds of the hills, the northern lights perhaps stealing green and silent along the top of the sky, and inside, in the small warm dark, a whole band of people lies breathing slow and deep and easy, gathered close, warm, fed, safe and together, with the fire keeping its low red watch over them all. This is the thing the people made against the ice, the truest and best of all their makings. Not a tool, not a shelter, but this, a warm circle of loved ones sleeping soundly in the dark, held safe by fire and fur and one another, while the long winter goes harmlessly by outside. It is the oldest peace there is, and it is the very same peace that is folding around you now, in your own warm dark, under your own soft covers, at the end of your own long day. Let it take you as far as it likes. There is nothing left to do but sleep. For the winter's past, and the springs returned as they always did, and the people, warm and fed and bound close through the long dark, rose each year into the brief bright summer and lived, and gathered and moved with the herds, and raised their children, and buried their old with ochre and ivory and love, and went on, season upon season, life upon life, generation upon patient generation, all down the long age of the ice. And slowly, so slowly that no one living through it could ever have seen it, two great things were happening across all those years, out beyond the firelight. The people were spreading, walking the long roads of the plains into lands no human foot had ever touched. And the great cold itself, the whole vast winter of the world, was beginning, at last imperceptibly, to loosen and to thaw. And it is toward those two slow wonders, the great journeys and the long warming, that our story must gently turn for the last time, as you turn now toward the last and deepest sleep of the night. Let your breath go slow. Let the fire burn down. And let us follow the people, softly, out across the world, and into the coming of the green. All through the long age of the ice, even as the people kept their warm fires and told their winter stories, they were doing a slow and wondrous thing that none of them could see the whole of, because it was far too large and far too slow for any single life to hold. They were spreading, on foot, across the entire face of the earth. It is one of the great quiet epics of our kind, and it asks to be felt gently, the way you feel a thing in a dream. Band by band, generation by generation, the people moved, not in any hurry, not on any journey they had planned, but simply following the herds and the seasons a little further each lifetime. A valley on, a river beyond, a plain past the last plain their grandparents had known, and over thousands of years that slow drifting carried human beings out of the warm lands where they had begun, and on across the whole cold world, into country after country where no person had ever stood before. Picture it softly. A small band coming over a rise at evening into a valley no human eye had ever seen, and pausing and looking and going down to make their fire in it. The first fire ever lit in that place in all the history of the world. Again and again and again it happened, all down the age of the ice, the human circle widening and widening across the earth, one new valley, one new plain, one new first fire at a time. And they went to the very ends of the world, those wandering bands, farther than we can easily believe. They followed the great herds out across the enormous plains of the north and the east, into the coldest and loneliest country there was, and where the ice had locked so much of the sea into its great white sheets that the waters drew back and bared long bridges of land between one shore and another. The people walked across, following the animals over the exposed floor of what would later be sea, into whole new worlds, into vast continents that had never known a human foot, spreading down through them over the generations from the cold north to the warm south, until at last there was scarcely a habitable corner of the whole earth where the smoke of a human fire did not rise. Think of the courage folded quietly into that, though the people themselves would never have called it courage. The simple willingness to go on, over the next ridge, into the unknown land, carrying the fire and the children and the little carved animals and the whole warm, portable world of home, trusting the old skills to make a living wherever the herds led. There is no grander story of our kind than this, the peopling of the earth, the long walk into every land, and it was done not by heroes or conquerors, but by ordinary families, warm and frightened and hopeful, moving a little farther each lifetime toward the far edges of the morning. Wherever you live tonight, on whatever shore, some band of those wandering people once came over the last hill into your country for the very first time, and made their fire, and stayed. You are, quite literally, sitting where their long walk ended. And then, so slowly that it took thousands of years, the great cold itself began to end. There was no single day of it, no sudden thaw, only that, across long ages, the balance tipped, and the warmth crept back into the world by the smallest of degrees. The winters softened, over centuries, by a breath. The great ice sheets in the north, which had stood like mountains and moved like nothing at all, began their slow retreat, melting back at their long edges a little faster than the snows could feed them, giving up, over the generations, the ground they had held for so unimaginably long. Vast lakes of blue meltwater gathered along their shrinking margins, great rivers ran from beneath them. The freed land emerged raw and new and streaming into a warming air. No one alive ever saw the ice move back, any more than anyone had seen it come, or seen a village grow, or seen a language change. It was all far too slow for eyes. A person might notice, perhaps in a long life, that the winters seemed not quite so cruel as the ones their grandmother spoke of, that the herds came a little differently than they once had, that a valley their people remembered as white lay green now in the summer. But mostly the great warming passed unseen, beneath the ordinary round of the years, the world remaking itself so gently that the people simply lived within the change, and adapted, and went on, as people always do. And as the warmth returned, the world itself was slowly, gently transformed, the whole face of it changing over the long generations into something new and softer and green. The cold, dry grasslands that had fed the great herds began, as the rains and the warmth increased, to give way. The treeless plains grew scattered trees, and then thickets, and then, over the centuries, whole advancing forests marching north into lands that had known nothing but grass and ice since before the memory of any people. The mammoth steppe, that vast, golden, wind-swept world where our whole night has been spent, slowly, slowly began to shrink and break apart and fade, its dry grasses yielding to marsh and woodland and tundra, its enormous single sweep dissolving into the more broken, wooded, watered, gentler country that the warming world would wear. And the great cold beasts, the lords of that vanishing plain, faded slowly with the world that had made them. The mammoth and the woolly rhinoceros and the rest of the shaggy multitude growing fewer down the long generations as their cold grasslands gave way to forest, until at last, after unimaginable ages, the great ones passed quietly out of the living world and into memory, and then out of memory and into the frozen ground, where they wait to this day. Let there be no grief in it tonight, though. Feel it gently, as the people surely felt it, not as a catastrophe, but as the slow, deep turning of the world, the way one season gives way to another, the way one long chapter closes so that the next may open. Nothing was lost that was not also, in the same slow motion, becoming something else. The cold world was not dying, it was changing into the warm one. It was becoming, over all those patient thousands of years, the green and gentle earth that we ourselves would one day call home. For that is where the long thaw was carrying them, carrying all of them, the people and the animals and the whole living world, out of the age of ice and into the mild green world that came after. The world of returning forests and swelling rivers and rising seas, of longer summers and kinder winters, of new animals and new plants and new abundance spreading across the freed and warming land. And the people carried into that new world everything the ice had taught them, the fire and the hearth, the sewn clothing and the built shelter, the deep knowing of animals and seasons, the stories and the songs and the making of beautiful things, the whole warm hard-won inheritance of 100,000 winters. They did not have to begin again. They walked out of the Ice Age already wise, already skilled, already carrying the fire, and in the gentle green world that opened before them, that inheritance would flower over the coming thousands of years into everything that was to follow, into the first planted seeds, and the first settled villages, and the first walled towns by the first faithful springs, and, in the fullness of a long slow time, into the very cities we once wandered together on another such night as this. The people of the ice were the great-grandparents of all of it. Every warm thing that came after was lit from the fire they kept alight through the cold. And the fire never went out. That is the deep truth at the bottom of the whole long night. From those first tended flames on the mammoth steppe, hand to hand, hearth to hearth, age to age, down all the thousands upon thousands of years, the fire has never once been let die, and it is burning still. Tonight, warm and low, in the room where you are lying, at the very end of the longest and gentlest handing down there has ever been. For here is the last soft truth of the night, and then I will let you go. You did not travel anywhere tonight, not really. You are one of them. You are the child of the ice, the far grandchild of those warm, clever, loving people on the cold gold plain. And everything about the way you are lying here this very moment comes down to you from them, unbroken, across the 20,000 years. The warmth you are wrapped in is the warmth they first learned to gather and keep against the cold. The shelter around you, the roof and the walls that hold the night out, is the far descendant of the hide tent and the bone house. The very covers drawn over you are the children of the sewn furs, made by loving hands to keep a body warm while it sleeps. The safety you feel, lying easy in the dark while the cold night stands outside your window, is the very safety the fire first gave the people, the ancient certainty that here, inside, by the warmth, all is well. And the deep sweet pleasure of it, of being warm and fed and sheltered and safe and held, at the end of a long day, that is the oldest human happiness there is, the one they felt every single night around their fires on the winter plain, the one our whole kind was forged in the cold to feel. When you sink into your warm bed tonight, you are doing the very thing they did, you are feeling the very thing they felt, you are in the truest and deepest sense, coming home to the warmth they made for you and kept for you, and handed down to you across all that time. You have been an Ice Age person all along. You are only doing tonight what your people have done every night for 20,000 years. So let it all be put away now, gently, like the little carved thing set aside at the fire's edge when sleep comes, the great plain and the golden grass, the herds and the northern lights, the fire and the hearth, the hide tents and the bone houses, the needle and the fur, the marrow and the broth, the painted horses glowing in the deep, the flute and the stories and the warm gathered family in the firelit dark. You do not need to hold any of it. It has been held for you all this while, and it will be held for you long after you are asleep, by hands far older and far more patient than either of us, and it will keep till morning, and long past the morning, and all the way down the ages, exactly as it has kept until now. Let your body sink down into the warmth, heavy and easy and complete, the whole dear weight of you, the way the great herds bedded down in the folds of the winter hills, the way the people sank into their soft furs when the long night's telling was done. Let your breath go long and slow and even, like the breath of a whole band sleeping close in a warm shelter while the winter passes harmlessly by outside. And let your thoughts, whatever few of them are still awake and wandering, come in now from the cold, in out of the dark, one by one, and lie down by the low warm fire, and be still. The day is over. All the days are over, every one of them 20,000 years deep, and each of them ended exactly like this, with the fire banked low, and the furs drawn close, and the people gathered warm and safe and together against the enormous gentle dark, with one more tired and blameless soul. This time it is you, lying down at last in the very heart of the warmth, held and kept and cared for. And if you should wake tonight, somewhere in the small deep hours, as any of us may, for it is the oldest and most human thing in the world to do, let it be easy, and let this be the thought that finds you there in the dark. The fire is still burning. It has never once gone out. Not in 20,000 years. Someone has always kept it. Hand to hand, hearth to hearth, all down the long cold ages and the long warm ones after, and it is burning tonight, somewhere near you, keeping its low red watch over the sleeping world exactly as it kept watch over the people on the winter plain. You are not out in the cold. You never will be. You are wrapped warm in the very heart of everything your people learnt to make against the dark, the fire, the shelter, the sown warmth, the gathered love, held safe inside it as surely as any child who ever slept in any warm shelter under any winter sky. You need not get up, and you need not count the hours, and you need not fear the waking, for it is only the old deep night of the world, the same one the people slept through so soundly, and it asks nothing of you at all. You may simply lie there in the warm dark and listen a while to the quiet, the way the people listen to the fire settling and the wind going harmlessly by. And when it is ready, it will know when, sleep will come drifting back up around you like warmth spreading from a hearth, and gather you in and carry you gently on toward morning. The fire has never yet lost a sleeper to the dark. It will not begin with you. Sleep now. Rest well. The fire will keep the watch, as it has kept it every night for 20,000 years, the low flame glowing, the warmth held close, the whole cold world shut safely out beyond the walls. And the morning will come to find you the way the spring came back to the people over the rim of the great plain, slowly and gently, and all in returning gold. Let the warmth hold you. Let the fire burn low. Let the long night of the world go by outside, harmless and far away, while you lie safe and warm and deeply cared for in the very heart of the light your people carried down to you across all the ages of the ice. There is nothing left to do, and nothing left to hold, and nowhere at all you need to be, but here, warm and drifting and nearly gone. And whenever you should find yourself here again, in the quiet, in the dark, in need of a little peace and an old, gentle story to carry you down into sleep, the fire at the calm archive will be burning low, and there will always, always be a place kept warm for you beside it. Good night.